and welcome to the Big 12 Mafia Show. I'm your host, Nathan Bomber Brown. With me are my two partners in crime. That would be Immaculate View and Moen Show. How you guys doing tonight?
Good, man. Good. Good to see you guys.
Doing well, except Tulane lost.
Okay, Tulane lost. Yeah, I'm not sure we're going to spend a lot of time on that tonight. But yeah, they were on a run there for the last several years. So it's too bad. I picked them too, and I was wrong. Anyway, I want to introduce our special guest tonight. That would be Bob Thompson's going to start us off. And then in 1 hour, we're going to be with the Four Horsemen podcast. That's Notre Dame. So we're going to go back-to-back interviews tonight. How you doing tonight, Bob? Happy holidays.
Same to you guys. I'm well, thanks.
Good. Made it through Christmas. That's the most important thing, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Well, we want to thank everybody for being here tonight. There's so much going on out in the world of college sports and college football specifically. And we're glad you're going to spend some of that time with us. Really quick, I want to remind everybody to follow us all on Twitter. You can see our names underneath our pictures right now. And then also you want to subscribe to this channel on YouTube. And on that subscription, make sure you turn on your notifications. That way you know when the show is going to be going live. So I'm going to get us started, Bob, with a very simple question for you, but the answer might not be so simple. Everybody saw the Florida State lawsuit and what they're trying to do to get out of their contracts with the ACC, and that also would include ESPN. We all saw your Twitter responses to some of the first reports that came out. I tracked them pretty carefully. And we saw your surprise and kind of you're almost stunned with some of these revelations. I'm going to ask you about a couple of those specific things. But first, let us know kind of what you were thinking when you first started seeing the reports coming out about that lawsuit.
Well, I was shocked that somebody actually finally pulled the trigger. There's been so much
Right.
talk about it There's been so much talk about it for so long. I just figured nobody was actually ever going to do it. But I mean, clearly Florida State has put a lot of work into this. I think clearly they knew they were going to do this. Otherwise they wouldn't have had the trustee meeting. So it was a surprise, then once it was filed and got into the kind of the meat of the thing, there's a few things that were surprising to me. I have to say here, I do some work in some of these NIL cases for the NCAA and these 5 conferences. And so I'm under a protective order that there's certain things I can't talk about. And
Oh, sure. No problem.
a lot of what I can't talk about are the TV agreements, because in order for me to do my job, I've seen the TV agreements, but I can't, I won't talk about them. Now, if things become public, then I can make comments on them. And so, which is why I made a comment on the ACC thing. I think the rationale for that, I can understand both sides why they wanted that potential out in 2027. The ACC wanted the Big Ten network very badly. The ACC wanted the ACC network very badly. They were 10 years behind the Big Ten network, 5 years behind the SEC network, and Pac-12 network, I think, launched in 2012. So they're about 5 years behind that too. So, it's something that Swofford wanted very badly. And I think he agreed to some things that ESPN asked for, because at that time, I would assume, as most networks were seeing, was that the cord cutting was starting to begin, and the sub fall off was starting to begin. And so what ESPN was looking for is they wanted their cake and eat it too. They wanted an agreement that, if they so chose, would extend all the way to 2036, because they're putting $100 million into the launch of this ACC network. They wanted to make sure that it was going to pay off. So in order to make sure it's going to pay off, you go for length and you go for certainty in your rights deals. But they also saw that the TV kind of ecosystem, whatever you want to call it, was changing because of cord cutting and things of that nature. And so by having an out put in 2027, that was smart. It gives them X number of years to see how it's going. And if it's not going well, they can go back to the conference and use that as an absolute out. So they should choose, or use it to renegotiate the carriage agreement for the remaining term. Smart, not unheard of. I think it was unusual that, if you believe what was written, that the conference unilaterally changed the option date
Right.
from, I believe it was 2021 to 2025 or
Right.
something along those lines. That to me would be a material event that I would assume that a conference would actually vote on, and that the commissioner would not necessarily just pull the plug. Now, he could have just talked to the executive board of the conference, and maybe they felt that was within their, I don't know all the bylaws of the ACC and what kind of a material decision requires a unanimous vote versus a majority vote of the entire conference versus, say, potentially the executive committee of the ACC, which is usually 3 or 4 or 5 board members. So those are the things that surprised me a little bit. Nothing about the grant of rights, nothing about, the schools never being able to see the media rights agreement. Those things are, they have confidentiality provisions. You can't have them floating around. You just can't have it.
Right.
So if you want to go look at them in the conference offices, you could go look at them in the conference offices. And it's pretty much the same in every conference. The last thing the networks want is those contracts floating around. And so I certainly understand that part. So those are the things that, from my side, really stuck out. I think the money, they gave you the worst case number at 570, whatever.
Right.
It appears to me they're looking for a negotiated settlement to get out. That's how most of these things usually end up anyway. So I'd expect that to happen.
Have you ever seen
Long answer.
anything? No. That's what people wanted to hear. They don't want to hear us. That was a fantastic answer, Bob. Thank you very much. Since we're all neophytes in this, right? We're all learning as we go. Yeah, I think I passed your 101 course in realignment. I think I made it into the 201 course at the break. I think you gave me a pretty good grade on that. As we look at this going forward,
Yes.
The thing that I think is the biggest question out there is jurisdiction. Because like the Washington State lawsuit, it did not hurt that they got a judge in Colfax, right? In the Palouse, that they were able to, basically have jurisdiction local versus in Seattle, which then might have, passed a different judgment, per the University of Washington side. You could argue that. So the question is this jurisdiction thing. I know you can't answer it specifically, but in a general sense, have you ever seen one of these suits actually get adjudicated, or are they always settled?
I've never seen one get into a courtroom, though.
Okay. And I think that's what everybody's counting on, right? I think you have people in the ACC
Right.
office
Yeah,
that don't want it to be in public.
No. I mean, TV guys, we're used to being under, save all your notes, save your emails, save all your files, don't delete anything, those type of orders. You get to schools and institutions, they're not quite as used to that. The other thing they don't really like is, depositions, which can be worse than being on a witness stand, actually, because there's no judge to really referee. So depositions are no fun. And a lot of these institutions are public, and so not subject to the sunshine laws that require full disclosure of any documents that might be floating around, which is how the ACC grant of rights actually ended up surfacing several years ago, was through a Freedom of Information Act type request by someone in North Carolina. So they try and do whatever they can to stay out of the courtroom. Usually there's mediation requirements if, there's some issue amongst members. It's just usually the best way to go is some sort of negotiated settlement. there's nothing worse than a divorce proceeding that goes on for a protracted amount of time. It's not good for either party. And so if you're going to go, you're going to go. The question is, how much blood can you get out of them before they take off?
Immaculate.
Well, just kind of go along on that real quick, what you said. I noticed while watching the trustees meeting that it seemed like the lawyer was more making a presentation for the public, like this is a trial in the court of public opinion. Is that kind of going along the lines with what you're thinking, that no one's really thinking this is actually going to go to court? It's all about pressure to see who has the better seat at the negotiation settlement table?
Right. I think so. I mean, certainly they're going to file locally because everybody wants it to be a home game, right? And then, but when, the long drawn out presentation by the attorney for Florida State, which I thought was very well put together, was clearly trying to get the court of public opinion on their side, which I think they were pretty successful. If you kind of looked at the reviews, the post meeting reviews, I think Definitely. They were pretty favorable for Florida State, and people were going, now the ACC is going to implode, which I don't know that that's necessarily going to happen, but certainly they have an issue they have to deal with here.
If I could follow something on that up here real quick, Nate. Thing that I learned most that really was a shocker, and we don't get too many big shockers anymore in realignment, was that they didn't, when they re-signed in 2016, for the ACC network and with Notre Dame and everything. I thought that all that we were told was that automatically gave them the extension to 2036. Now here we find out from these documents that they had to look at that wasn't ever the case. How, from your perspective, how is it that kind of a story can become the major known story to everyone when it actually was never really the full truth? Like, how does that? I don't know how much you can say about that because of your position, but that was the shocker to me. Is like it was just totally not true. Like there was an option to go to 2036, but that's all that was really actually added.
Right. And I don't know how much review when the original deals were being put together. I don't know how much review each individual school actually had. I would say that in my past experience, what we would draw up is a terms and conditions sheet that might be distributed amongst the schools, and have the major issues, term, dollars, back end rights, selection process, things like that. I would think certainly if there was outs or options, to be exercised at some point in the future, if I was an AD or a president, I would expect that those would have been in some sort of a term sheet summary. Maybe they didn't do that in the ACC. Each conference is different. Each conference runs different ways, and each conference has different governance provisions that require votes on certain things, and not on in other conferences. No vote would be required on that thing. And not being an expert at the ACC's bylaws, I can't really guess why it happened, but apparently, they made 4 trips to the conference to review the agreement. It's very, I've been in the NBA offices looking at different agreements on behalf of clients, and they practically they sit there with you and make sure you're not taking pictures with your phone, and that you're not walking out of there with copies.
You might have to go back and look at the same thing twice, is what you're saying, since you can't.
Yes, but I can tell you this much.
The ACC?
What's that?
You've seen that other places.
I've seen. Oh yeah, as far as the rights seller keeping the contract very, very tight. Oh, absolutely. Okay. In the case of the NBA, for instance, each team has a local rights deal, and then they're also subject to the national deals. Well, the league keeps copies of all the local deals on file. And if you're in a situation where there's let's say there's a provision in the agreement that says you'll be paid the average of what the two markets above you and the two markets below you are being paid. As a consultant, I would go in and see that, team A and B and team D and E were getting paid X. So that means team C gets paid Y. And so in order to do that, you have to kind of go through all the contracts. You have to attach financial dollar amounts to certain provisions that might not have, they have clearly economic value, but there's not a specific dollar attached to them, so that you're comparing contracts on an apples to apples basis. So it is not unusual at all to have a conference or a league office keep all the contracts on file. And that way, this stuff doesn't get floating around, because that's the last thing that the TV guys want. And even the conferences or the leagues and conferences don't want it either, because it's very confidential information. And the last thing you need is that kind of stuff floating around.
Makes sense. Moen.
Yeah, Bob, you mentioned cord cutting. What are your views on the increasing trend of over-the-air viewership via antenna, and the effects that media bleed is having on expansion targets? For example, somebody in Florida picking up Tallahassee and Miami, and maybe a little bit of Southern Georgia.
Right. Well, at the high point of the kind of the cable business, which I used to encompass cable, satellite, whatever, all that stuff, bundled distribution packages, there was about 110 million. I think the top TBS and had about 110 million, and they were always very, very high. They're usually higher than ESPN and anybody. So we're down into the 70. We're about 70 million. So you've shed 40 million homes have just gone, disappeared. And and those homes are paying an entity like ESPN, say $10 a month, and that's it's a lot of money that just goes up into thin air. So, but what you've seen is a couple of things. Number one, the ratings have held up very well, and that's for a couple of reasons. And I'm talking about ratings in sports. Ratings in other stuff isn't holding up so well. So, but ratings in sports has held up, because if you think about it, if you're a sports fan, it's pretty hard to not be in a bundle. You just don't get enough. You can't get enough. You can't get it at ESPN. You can't get it at FS1. You can't get it at Golf Channel. You can't get it at NFL. You can't get it at all those channels. So a good percentage of the sports fan is holding the bundle together right now, if you ask me, even at 70 million. As far as increased over-the-air viewership, that's absolutely true. I mean, with the new digital antennas, unless you live in a place that you're surrounded by mountains or surrounded by very tall buildings, you can get a plethora of channels over the air with a very simple digital antenna. I'm not talking about some monstrosity on the roof of your house. This is something it's better than the old rabbit ears, but it acts in much the same way, but much more efficiently. So that has been one of the reasons why you see some of the conferences and many of the major sports properties going much heavier on an over-the-air presence in their deals rather than cable, like ESPN or FS1, because you get not only the bundled aspect, but you also get anybody who has an antenna. You get that as well. And so hence with the Big Ten deal, you've got CBS, NBC, Fox, and the bulk of the games are on broadband or on OTA, available technically to everyone. And then you flip around and you look at what happened to the Pac-12, and one of the main reasons it's not around anymore is because it was streaming only. So they didn't even have the cable only aspect. It was streaming only and no linear guarantees. And that's what drove several schools away.
So as a bridge from the Pac-12, which we've seen over the last 18 months, and now what's going on with the ACC, we see a lot of similarities, right? A lot of this messaging is the same. I kind of made fun of a Wake Forest announcement that came from their SID department that basically said, no, we're strong, we're ACC strong. And I just pictured that same message being written by Kirk Schultz at Washington State. And it's almost word for word how their continuity and we're strong as a conference and all these things. Meanwhile, somebody down the road is selling their car. So as we bridge, let's jump from Pac-12 now to the ACC specifically. Besides the similarities and distinct differences, what is the one thing the ACC has that is going to set it apart in the way this is handled versus the way the Pac-12 blew up?
Well, that's an interesting question. I haven't really given that much thought. I think the Pac-12 lost some, the two major markets, or the teams in the major market, UCLA and USC, and so that was a big blow. I don't know that there's a equal scenario there with the ACC. I think Miami's pretty big, but they have some interest to certainly other conferences out there, because in many cases, the ACC is very dominant on the East Coast in terms of markets. The Big Ten's not in Florida. Big Ten's, really, other than Maryland, Virginia area and Rutgers, the Big Ten's kind of non-existent. And the same for the SEC, other than Florida and South Carolina. So there's some nice geographical land to be had if somebody was, out hunting. So, and that's important because, like I mentioned, for your TV guys, they're still going to go get retransmission consent from, the distributors, whether they're a cable channel or a network. And that's a huge percentage of their revenue. People don't realize that on the cable network side, it's not unusual to have 75% of your revenues comes from license fees and only 25% comes from advertising. On the broadcast network side, it used to be 100% ad revenue, but in the era of retransmission consent, those figures have flip-flopped. It's not quite as extreme as the cable networks are, but well in excess of 50% of broadcast stations, networks revenue comes from retransmission consent fees, which is the same, basically another word for a license fee like ESPN and CNN and networks like that collect. So the fact that you have that product to take into new areas is extremely important. So you're looking for unutilized geography that your television partners can, somehow mine and create new dollars out of. Plus, if you have a conference channel, as both the SEC and the Big Ten do, Big 12 obviously doesn't, but they kind of run it all on ESPN Plus. But that gives you new territories that you can go in, and instead of collecting what you would call an outer market fee because there's no school in that territory, you get an inner market rate, which can be 10 times what the outer market fee is.
Okay, immaculate.
Yeah, I guess we'll take that in. And we're talking markets, and my interest lies pretty heavily right now with Miami, considering some things that have been said. Hopefully I don't tread on anything here that we can't speak about, but just kind of in your opinion, former Fox executive, I tend to look a little bit down on Miami in terms of it's a big deal, but it's not as big a deal as people say. It doesn't have the stadium, like a campus stadium. It's actually on the peninsula, so it doesn't have a real wide reach. Where do you see them? Like, how do you think that the networks would see that as an absolute darling pick, or is that something that maybe gets said a lot but isn't as true as what people think?
Look, you're looking at market size, you're looking at history, you're looking at rivalries, you're looking at those type of things. What they've done in the ratings most recently, and so Miami hits it on the rating side without the market size. Miami Lauderdale, the two markets are pretty good size. So, but you're right. I think the school suffers a little bit. Well, they've been down for a while, and I think Cristobal will get him back. He's a great recruiter. I'm not 100% sold on him as a coach yet, but he's being a former Oregon head coach. I recall a few missteps. Not as bad as running the ball against Georgia Tech with a minute to go. So it's, Miami's a sexy market. It's got a lot of, cool stuff about it. And it's always has a certain level of intrigue. And they had a mystique for a while when, Jimmy Johnson was there, and to a certain extent, Erickson, and even all the way back to, Schnellenberger. They have some really good history and good quarterbacks, things like that. They need to make a comeback, but I think it's an intriguing market, especially when you start looking at the other options that are out there. But TV guys are going to like it, but it's got one big check, and that's the market size. The other stuff are kind of not quite necessarily up to par. I think the stadium issue you make is very important. I don't know if they could ever, they used to play in the old Orange Bowl, which was actually closer to them playing up Joe Robbie now. And I don't even know if you could build a stadium anywhere in Miami right now.
It looks tough.
The land is too, they're building skyscrapers in areas of town that when I lived there in the early 80s, you wouldn't even go to. The properties become so valuable that I find it hard to believe that they find a place to put a football stadium in.
Now, that's not maybe a network. Yeah.
No, I was just going to do the super chat.
I was just going to follow up the stadium thing real quick.
Go ahead, ask.
I was just going to say, I think that's probably a bigger conference and school issue, and the networks probably don't care so much about where they're playing as long as they can fill it up. But from dealing with people, I don't know what you could say on that, but do you think that would be an issue for a conference in this day and age, or would that be overblown? Like wherever they're playing isn't as big of a deal anymore?
I think facilities matter in conferences. If you look at what a lot of the institutions are in these schools that are in the high money, the high money conferences, and even to a lesser extent, lower level conferences, they all have building initiatives going on. You can't walk on a campus anymore and not see cranes all over the place. And whether you're retrofitting a stadium or building a new training center or, there's always new facilities going on. And a lot of the money that's being paid out from a TV standpoint is going towards those things. But it also, your athletic department also helps drive other donations that go to the general fund or whatever to build buildings and things like that. So I think it's not, what conferences always want to know is that schools are going to support and invest in their athletic endeavors. And that includes first and almost foremost facilities. With NIL in there now, it might be slightly different in that they want to make sure you got a good collective. But certainly conferences are looking to see a commitment that will either upgrade existing facilities or build new ones.
Gotcha.
Here's a question, if you can answer it and realize that there's some stuff you can't tell us, Bob. But Sergeant Pickles gives us a super chat that says, any truth that when choosing my two teams conference gets a pick and media gets a pick? If so, who fits that bill in the ACC? That I've heard that as a rumor. You get one, we get one.
We kind of talk about that a little bit.
Can you comment on that at all?
No, I mean,
okay,
I can tell you this: I never got a pick. I never.
Okay.
So somebody else was picking at our company, but I don't know who it would have been, but it wasn't me.
Okay.
I think that what's going to happen is, the conference. The interesting thing I thought that two things, and that was in the whole ACC conversation, what the Florida State thing, they didn't really point a lot of fingers at ESPN. They
Right.
pointed a lot of fingers at the conference.
Yeah.
And then the other thing that was very interesting, I don't know if you guys saw the Seattle PI article the other day about the kind of the last hours of the Pac-12.
We did
the
see
last
that as
month
well.
or
Yeah.
whatever it was. And it was, there was a lot of emails from the president of Washington and conversations with, the commissioner and conversations with the president of WSU and other schools. Never once was, someone said, yeah, Fox called us and invited us to the Big Ten, or there was really no, they wondered what was going on with the TV deal, and they didn't like the TV deal they were ultimately put at. But there wasn't this, certainly on the coach, the president side there wasn't a lot of finger pointing that TV torpedoed the Pac-12 conference. I think the Pac-12 had some issues of their own, but I this whole idea, again, I've said it for years. I don't think that, to the extent people believe that TV is pulling all the strings and the commissioners and college presidents are puppets on the strings is hugely overblown. Are they consulted? Absolutely, they have to be, because they're the ones writing the checks, and you better ask them. The last thing they should do is find out that you're adding schools, the day it happens. That's just not right.
Yeah, I've always felt that the way to describe it is advise and consent. So they'll advise with you, they'll give you opinions, do research, and then they'll say, okay, we really want to make this happen. You could say, okay, that's great, but we're not going to add any more money to the media deal. You can't force media.
A lot of it depends on
have more money.
Right. No, I wouldn't disagree with that. And a lot of it also depends on what's specifically laid out in the contract. I mean, there's addition and subtraction language, and there's makeup of the conference language, and there's, is there automatic ads, and what happens if somebody, takes off, and a lot of it is handled contractually in advance. So, in a perfect world, in my perfect world, there's no automatic addition language, but there's automatic subtraction language if somebody leaves. And you can't replace P5s with G5s. And, a lot of that stuff just depends on how hard you fight in the original contract. And it sure makes it a lot easier when you have that stuff all tied up, so it's not left to the imagination and a long negotiation on the backside when something happens.
Stephen, another super chat. Thanks a lot, Stephen, for your donation. He asked Bob, if the ACC loses or gains 5 of their best programs, I would say loses 5 of their best programs, could you see ESPN just dropping them in 2027? Is Texas, Oklahoma, Sunbelt, AAC enough programming?
Well, they have the SEC too.
That's what he's saying. That's the Texas, Oklahoma.
Is he implying that Texas and Oklahoma are the only good schools in the SEC?
Yeah, what he's saying is that the SEC has more bandwidth for games. They've added more schools, so there's more.
I see.
So is the ACC as an entity valuable enough to, keep it going after 2027?
Will it carry it? Well, I think if you look at the SEC and you look at the Big 12, which they have 2/3 of, the Sun Belt, the AAC, I think they have Conference USA, don't they? Small piece, or I think they have Conference USA. I think, it's enough. They've got, 3 channels they like to program. Certainly ABC, ESPN, ESPN2, ESPNU to a certain extent, but it's kind of interchangeable with 2. I think it's enough. You don't need to have 4 windows. You can get by with 3 windows on most of them, and some of them you can probably get by with 2 windows per day. And they've got other stuff they've got to get on that time of year as well. So there's some big tennis tournaments going on, things like that. So I think it would be enough. If you're saying is if they lost ACC, would they be able to program? Yeah, I think ESPN would be fine. Now, if the ACC I don't know what happens to the ACC if they lose 5 schools. If they've backfilled, they've added 3. Is that enough if they lose 5 to stay where they're at with the ESPN?
Right.
I can't get into what might happen on that side, but I think a lot of it depends on who goes. And that's the big question, I think, for everybody with the ACC. It's it's kind of like what was going on with the Pac-12. It's like, okay, is FSU an outlier, or are they just kind of the leader of the pack, and a bunch of people are going to jump if somehow they're successful? I mean, they're clearly doing the heavy lifting, it appears, at this point.
Moen.
Yeah, Bob, you mentioned the importance of the Fort Lauderdale, Miami market in terms of television viewership. Could a case be made for Atlanta as well? How do you view the Atlanta television market?
Meaning
Atlanta's a great TV market, but I think Georgia Tech's got some checks against it. Just it doesn't really have a national presence, never really has had a huge national presence, at least not while I've been around the business. They had some good years, obviously, but I think that Atlanta's a great market. And the problem is, though, that they're kind of dominated by everybody who surrounds them. With Alabama, Georgia, Auburn, that's pretty heavy competition up against. And if you're there, I don't get the impression that there's a ton of Georgia Tech fanatics in Atlanta. A lot of people. Atlanta is a lot like LA, Chicago, New York. There's a lot of people from somewhere else. Just how it is. I think I would give Miami a bit of a nod over Atlanta.
So as a follow-up, do you think it's in the Big Ten's best interest to take 2 markets in Florida in order to lock the state down, similar to what they did with USC and UCLA to lock down the Southern California market?
I don't see it as a scenario similar to Southern California, no.
Okay.
I don't. If you're saying whoever takes Florida, do they need to take Miami as well? I would say not necessarily.
Immaculate.
Now, would you say
is that the question?
Yeah, that was the question. Yes.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right.
GT has definitely been overshadowed as an ACC school. Now, if they say they were in the Big Ten and you had Ohio State come in, Michigan come in, Florida State come in, Penn State come in, USC, and you have these new matchups coming in there into Atlanta, which is kind of the heart of the South. Do you think over time that could make a change in terms of that brand, that team, or just is it enough in the Atlanta market that it would be worthwhile for that ad for the Big Ten?
It kind of goes up like a Rutgers scenario to me. I think if they got good, yeah, but no, sooner or later people are gonna get tired of going to watch them get blown out, and so unless they kind of step up their game and get better, I don't know that it necessarily does a whole lot. I think also the fan, if you're talking about will it serve displaced fans from Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin, wherever, yeah, it will to a certain extent, but you can't take the Georgia Tech stadium and turn it into a Ohio State home game. It's just not the same thing. Even if it was mostly Ohio State people, it's still not the same thing. So I like the market. I think the schools, it's a great institution without a doubt. I just think from a football standpoint, it's got some marks against it.
Bob, can we dispel a rumor? I wouldn't even call it a rumor. I would call it groupthink almost at this point. Through all of realignment, we picture in our minds this idea that we're playing realignment risk, right? And by taking a school in a region, that necessarily gives you ownership of that region. In my opinion, you're going to look for schools that are going to bring more than just a locale. What are the things that a school by itself, outside of brand recognition, outside of graduation rates and everything, what is the one thing that would determine why you'd take a Georgia Tech, and I'm not saying you would, but you would take a Georgia Tech instead of a Louisville?
Well, you start, looking at things like alumni, where the alumni are located,
Okay.
because that becomes very important when you're, looking at ancillary opportunities from a revenue standpoint with, say, a conference channel. The Big Ten did significant studies on where all their alumni were located, and because it's important, and when you want people calling up the cable company saying, I want the Big Ten network, or I want the ACC network, and so it matters where those people live. You want to, you certainly want to know what the kind of the rabidness level of the fans. Are they very engaged? Are they do they follow things, win or lose, or are they fair weather fans? I mean, all the typical things you would think. It's not just location, but I mean, certainly it's important, but it's not just the one and only thing is market size. And, is it a place we currently don't have a flag planted? But market size and new markets are important, but so, there's a number of other things as well.
Do you think, and you might not be able to answer this, but this is the ongoing question out in the world right now. Besides Florida State, which everybody on my panel on our shows we're assuming they're going to the Big Ten. These other schools that are available, I'll stay away from the North Carolina State, Virginia Tech. We won't talk about them at all. But maybe Clemson or a Miami. If you were God of all schools that you could place where they would be in the next iteration of realignment, which of those schools you think would be more valuable? Miami or Clemson?
I can't do that.
Okay.
Sorry.
All right. No, it's okay. I wasn't sure if you could answer it or not, but
I don't really like to get into a box of who's more valuable,
right, I can understand
and even more importantly, who's going to go where, because I can't do that.
All right, that's fine. You by the way, you gave me the same answer when we talked about BYU and Utah, so I understand. At least you're consistent, and we're talking about these different schools. It's nice that you're consistent. We've got so many questions that we've gotten from people out in the world. Immaculate or Moen, do you guys have any other follow-ups? We've had Bob for almost 45 minutes. I'm thinking only one or two more questions.
Had one put to me from Chad. If I'm trying to come up with a way to ask this and that Bob might be able to answer. One of the rumors out there, we'll say, is that, say, like Virginia and Virginia Tech, North Carolina and North Carolina State are heavily tied together. From your perspective in the past in dealing with this, maybe not necessarily anything that you're into today, but in the past, how real do you think that is? In particular, maybe to those schools if you can, but if not, just in general.
I've heard it a lot, but I've never really seen it happen. I mean, clearly USC and UCLA weren't joined at the hip because one's public and one's private. If I think back of moves that have been made, people talked about Oklahoma State. That didn't happen. Texas A&M, Texas. That didn't happen. So
Washington State, Washington, Oregon.
Oregon State.
Iowa,
I mean, there's always a lot of
State.
smoke. Yeah, there's a lot of smoke out there that says, the House of Representatives or whatever, the state government is going to not let that happen. Right. The closest thing to anything happening was, UCLA has to pay Cal some money every season. And so it's a lot of talk. I don't know that it's necessarily something that's real.
If I may, reason why I think a lot of people think that is because when the times of leaving the Big East to the ACC, there was actually Virginia government involvement that I think it was Virginia that was going to be moving on, or was it Virginia Tech, one or the other, and basically some Virginia lawmakers and officials got involved and made sure that both went. So I think that's why people talk about that now, and because of them.
Yeah.
But is that
Yeah,
maybe
I could
not
see
as big of
I
a deal, you
recall
think?
that.
Mhm.
Yeah, I recall that. I think Virginia Tech was leaving the Big East.
Yeah.
Anyways, there's, I guess, the one that kind of goes against the rule, but again, there's
Okay.
been a lot of talk
Right.
but you never really see it. I mean, when was that? Back in 2008 or something like that?
Yeah.
I can't
And then we had
remember
the Texas situation with the Big 12, and Baylor got involved and forced Baylor and
Yeah,
Texas Tech to get added. So we've had a couple, but like you're saying, it's
right.
not the norm. So when it gets brought up, it's hard to tell. I mean, with North Carolina, there's the shared board, but it's hard to tell what's going on out here. So I was kind of curious what you
Yeah,
thought.
and I think each state's different, and I think the state, congressional or state government involvement in the schools, it's very different on a state by state basis.
Right.
Sometimes it's more board of trustees and things like that, and the governor can squawk, and the House of Representatives can squawk, but they really don't have any juice when it comes to it.
Okay.
Moen, one last question. Do you have one?
Yeah, Bob, I know you may not be able to answer this one, but I'll ask it anyway. Have you ever gifted a brand new car for Christmas or received a brand new car for Christmas?
No.
There's an
So
inside
who are
joke
all
there,
these
Bob.
commercials for, Bob?
I don't know, but no one.
So, Bob has been
Somebody must be buying cars. Somebody must be buying cars, or they're not buying enough cars, so they're advertising. I understand, the frustration with the loads, but I got to tell you, the commercial formats really haven't changed. I think what you see now more than in terms of total commercial minutes, I think what you see now is that the breaks are longer, and so
Right.
where you used to see 2-minute breaks, now you're seeing 3-minute, 10-second breaks, and so that's there's a lot of commercials, and then you've got a couple promos that get thrown in there on top of it, and there's also there's probably more floaters than there used to be, and what floaters are basically injury timeouts. And play reviews. And the one thing that people don't realize is that there never used to be, views by the officials, and now there's a ton of them. And it's to sit there and just have your camera on some official peering through a thing, or to show the play, ad nauseum for as long as it takes to sometimes come up with these decisions. It's probably, it's a good time to get up and go use the restroom. So they run a commercial or two, but I understand the frustration, and hey, I'm the same way. I'm the guy that I got that thing in my hand, and you hit what is the end of half break, an end of quarter break, and I know it's going to be 2 or 3 minutes before they come back, and I just hit the button and start scrolling around, see what's out there.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that was kind of some of the concern with the Pac-12 if they were on the Apple network. That idea of switching between providers was a problem, because you have to leave one app to go to another, and that adds another 30 to 40 seconds at times. And I think that was a concern. So
Yeah,
I think it's real.
Yeah, it's difficult going from platform to platform, and somebody will figure it out. And I think there's already been some attempts. And on I use DirecTV, and you can go to their Sports Central thing, and I can pretty easily go from a DirecTV feed to a streaming feed much faster. I don't have to leave and go to a hit the tile thing again. It's kind of presented as part of my programming lineup, and so it's a much quicker. It's still not seamless like it is with say a cable remote or a DirecTV remote, but it's getting better. And I think that sooner or later they'll have it down so that you don't have quite the difference or difficulty switching between, say, a streaming service and a linear broadcaster cable channel.
Roku has tried as well. ESPN
Yeah.
said they're going to
Yep.
check and see. So anyway, well, Bob, thank you so much for being here tonight. Happy holidays. We appreciate you giving us a little of your time. Do you have any questions for us before you go?
No, I'm good. I hope you guys have a great holidays, happy New Year, and stay tuned to see what happens with the ACC. It's going to be a lot of busy attorneys and ACC folks over the next couple weeks. Nobody's having the real happy break week between Christmas and New Year's.
Right.
Do you think it'll be fast or
You
slow?
guys be good.
You think it's gonna be a slow burn? Just had to ask that after you said that. Do you think it'll be a slow burn, or do you think it'll be?
That's a good question. I think
Maybe-
it's a couple things on this. Number one, I think they're going to try and go as Florida State obviously wants to go fast. ACC probably wants to go slow. I think one of the things I said the other day is going to be interesting is to see how people react to this, because I said this I think on Monday or the day before they filed suit, and which was actually turned out to be the day that the ACC had a preemptive suit filed. How people react, how we now know how the conference reacted. They actually sued first. Yeah, and so how the other conferences have been stone quiet because obviously they don't want to be involved with some sort of tortious interference of an existing relationship. The only school that's really come out and said anything that I've seen is Wake Forest. I don't know if anybody else has said
Boston
anything.
College.
Been kind of
Oh, Boston College did.
Boston College did too.
They did.
Yeah, Boston College. There was a Demon Deacons thing, and then there was a Eagles thing.
Right. So that's it, and nobody from TV said a thing, which makes sense because they don't want to be. I think everybody's a little nervous, or learn their lesson from the whole Pac-12 thing. Nobody wants to be, nobody wants blood on their hands, and so I can see why they'd be quiet, but. Kind of the conference acted pretty much as I figured they would, and that makes sense. And
hang on
we'll
a
see
second.
what happens.
Bob, you just said something
that
I think is something that is so important. The last year and a half in the Pac-12, what did we hear the whole time? The Big Ten doesn't want to have blood on their hands. We've said it on this show. The Big Ten does not want blood on its hands. At the end of the day, did that matter at all? It didn't matter at all because it's actually the schools eating themselves alive in their own conference. Had nothing to do with the Big Ten.
You're correct. I don't believe that the Big Ten wanted to put the final bullet, and I still think the conference, could have stayed together if they had a reasonable TV deal. Right. But hey, at the end of the day, that when Colorado left, and then the second game of dominoes started, and the end result combined with the TV deal was that there's no Pac-12 anymore, which is unfortunate. Hopefully that's not the case here, but as we all know, in the world of realignment, good luck trying to figure out what's going to happen. And if somebody tells you they know, don't believe them because they don't know.
Thanks, Bob, so much for being here tonight. We'll catch you in a few weeks.
All right, guys, take care.
Thanks, Bob.
Have a good
All
night.
right, see you later.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
All right, take care. See y'all. Take care.
Good stuff, man.
Great interview.
Even on his way out, he's saying stuff that you're just like, wait.
Yeah, the blood on my hands thing never rang true to me. And I know I asked you guys a lot of the opinions about whether the Big Ten offices, Petiti, cared about the blood on your hands type thing. They don't want the perception that they were the ones to put the bullet in the head. I thought that was all overblown. I always felt like that was propaganda to me.
There's things that you have to say for legal reasons. But even now we're getting, these comments from like the Washington president and her memoirs about it coming out through a certain guy. And she's basically saying they reached out to the Big Ten. Like they were talking to him. I mean, she kind of blew the whole lid on that. Right. I was kind of like, wow, you really want to defend yourself that you kind of remember that's your conference now. You might not want to piss off Petiti, but hey,
agreed.
You got to do what you got to do. She probably has some support in that.
There was a lot of questions there. I hope everybody understands, especially if you came into the show late. Bob told us at the beginning there was stuff he couldn't answer. So
Yeah.
there was some things that we tried to, dive into that all of us have been asking since Florida State did their lawsuit, and he simply couldn't answer those questions. He couldn't really go into it. So if you ask those questions in the chat, don't feel like you were ignored. Just understand that there was only certain things that Bob could actually tell us. He's involved on several legal actions or as a consultant, NIL. There's some realignment stuff. So he's the godfather, as we
He
call
has
him.
his own
Yeah.
business. He's still
Yeah.
in the game, just not in that same role that we think of him as.
Absolutely. Hall of Fame college football. It's Jason's birthday today, by the way. Happy birthday, Jason.
Oh,
I
happy birthday!
appreciate you being here, spending your time. He says, gentlemen, I'm stoked to see the show and hear Mr. Thompson's take on the madness. Thanks for bringing us this amazing content. Thank you very much, Jason. You're a great friend. I appreciate you being here and spending your time with us today. There's another comment that I wanted to get from Larry M., who's a Jayhawk, said national brand plus location plus academic
Oh,
equals big
That's a
membership.
Hawkeye. That's a Hawkeye.
Oh, what did I say? I'm sorry.
You
about
said a
to
Jayhawk.
Oh, okay. I'm
have a
sorry.
murder
Jeez.
go down on
Well,
this
you guys,
show.
you guys freaking out. Okay, I said the wrong thing. Sorry. Gosh,
We just have to give you a little
I
trouble.
appreciate it. I'm glad you corrected me. Here we go. Four Horsemen podcast. How we doing tonight, Dylan?
Hey guys, gentlemen and Buckeye. I'm doing well. How's everyone?
No, that's a
Great.
Jayhawk. He's a Jayhawk. Just call him a Jayhawk.
Mm-mm.
It works for me.
It does. It doesn't work for him. So anyway, did you get a chance to catch our Bob Thompson interview at all?
I did not. Sorry. A little
No, that's
busy on my
okay.
end. I'm sure he was awesome. How'd it go?
It went really well. We talked about everything but Notre Dame. So I think
Perfect.
that's good that you're here to sort of catch us up on how things are going in your way. First of all, let me introduce everybody. This is Dylan. He's with the Four Horsemen podcast. He's been on our show a couple times, and he's going to come and educate us on what's going on with Notre Dame right now. Obviously, they're sitting in the catbird seat. Everybody wants them. And we're hoping that you can give us some education on kind of what you're hearing on your side, Dylan. Since we set up this interview, you said you were going to go out and do some research, try to find out a little bit more on this realignment side for the ACC. What did you find out?
Well, that's a great question. I think the short way to describe Notre Dame's position right now is kind of a photo we've been using as a meme, and it's like a very young Catholic priest just sunbathing, smoking cigarettes, just chilling. And that's kind of where Notre Dame is at with it. It's more, I think, play it by ear. I don't have sources with the university. I'll just say that ahead of time. It's more so reading the tea leaves and looking into what can be done in the future here. So we'll get into it for sure. But I think NBC's home slate of games that Notre Dame is going to give them is kind of a good place to look, and that's where I spent my afternoon. Just kind of trying to figure out where Notre Dame goes from here. How does NBC get that value out of this deal with the ACC potentially imploding? So, I've got that set up, but I'm happy to discuss, FSU, the whole ACC situation, and anything else we get to today.
All right, awesome. Immaculate. I'll start with you.
Well, we often talked here, and Moen would say that all Big Ten expansion goes through Notre Dame. And we were just talking about this briefly, that basically proved out to be true, that none of this actually lifted off with the ACC until Notre Dame came out and announced their deal with the NBC. Would you agree that that's the deal, or are we just kind of, talking bad about Notre Dame when we say that?
It's hard to say, right? If Florida State gets out of this, I think expansion will start with Florida State.
Mm-hmm.
That would be what I would expect. It doesn't sound like the SEC is too interested. In fact, I was reading an article you shared, Nate, from The Athletic, that Paul Feinbaum was kind of speaking on. I'm going to choose to believe on behalf of the SEC when he said that Florida State is in the bottom of a group of three that they're interested in.
Right.
Yep.
So I think, further Big Ten expansion starts in Tallahassee. And I do think they'll get out regardless of how much money it is. We'll let the lawsuits settle. But I think Notre Dame might be the last piece of expansion, if anything, not the first.
Agree.
Okay, Moen.
Yeah, Notre Dame signs a new deal with NBC. How does it feel for Notre Dame to be the lead into the Big Ten
Uh,
primetime slot?
well, in all but 2 weeks, and it's good. I think it's been beneficial for both sides. One thing we talked about just on the podcast before was Notre Dame not getting the ratings because it has no support, no lead in, no follow up game. And by just having the Big Ten's presence, I think on NBC, it's helped. And I think it's helped the NBC broadcast as well. So I don't mind. I think it's a pretty symbiotic relationship there. The fact that we'll get two Big Ten games to lead in for us for primetime games will be great too. But yeah, that's I know it definitely makes the Big Ten fans feel probably a little better that Notre Dame is your lead-in. But from my perspective, I'm pretty happy with it.
I'm going to pause here for a second and thank everybody for being here tonight on a 2 days after Christmas special. We appreciate you being here. We're talking Notre Dame right now. Before, if you are arriving late, we had Bob Thompson on for an hour. So I'd encourage you to go back and watch that if you're concerned at all about realignment. While you're here, please subscribe to our show on YouTube and then follow us all on Twitter, including Dylan at the Four Horsemen podcast. It's a great show, and I encourage everybody to go and check that out. Moen or Mackie, do you guys have another question? I have one if you don't.
No, go right ahead.
So, Dylan, as we've been talking about Florida State, and they've been the ones that have owned the sort of news cycle, were you surprised that they didn't have a travel partner? Well, let's not even call him a travel partner, just somebody that would join the suit to sort of add power and legitimacy to it. And the two I think about immediately are Miami and Clemson.
That's a great question. I'm of the opinion that I think Florida State goes alone. And that's because I think the exit fee is going to be pretty brutal for some of those teams where you look at the playoff expanding to 12. And if you're a school like Miami, for example, I was having this chat with a Miami fan. I think it might be strategically beneficial for them to stay in the ACC and rebuild that winning brand in a weakened conference before they make that move to the Big Ten or the SEC. So I'm not really surprised Florida State's alone. Clemson's the one to watch out for. That's the other one I'm sure we've all heard a lot of buzz on. But it's I think they're waiting for somebody to trailblaze in this case before we see other programs in the ACC do the same. So I'm not surprised it's FSU alone, but I wouldn't be surprised if we see one or two schools join them pretty soon as well.
And as a follow-up to that, because Miami and Clemson are sort of on the outside, but they're fielding offers, as it were. They can't do it in official, but we're talking third and fourth party context. Is there any concern that Notre Dame? What is the number of schools that, in your opinion, would leave the ACC and still think Notre Dame's going to anchor that conference? At what point does it become too washed out?
That's a great question. I think it depends on what they do next, right? I know there's some theories out there about adding, your Tulanes and your USFs and kind of hoping that keeps the conference alive.
Right.
There could be, I don't know if there's any legitimacy to it, but there could be mergers or other kind of arrangements. It's really hard to look into that crystal ball a few years down the line. But I think it'll be, if it does break down, I think it'll be slow. I think FSU will be first, and then we'll wait a few years. I don't foresee, 6 or 7 leaving for the 2025 season. I'd be surprised if that happened. If it did, and it was just Notre Dame, at that point, you're looking at another G5 conference, just with Notre Dame's kind of scheduling attached to it. And at that point, Notre Dame would have to ask themselves, is this worth it? Are we getting our money out of it? Are we being negatively impacted with respect to the college football playoff? And that's a tough one. I'm sure we'll get into that. I'm sure you guys have interesting opinions on it as well, but we'll see.
Macula or Moen, do you guys have another question? I've got 10 questions for him, so if you guys don't have any, I'll keep going.
Yeah, just kind of going on. I'm keeping tabs on chat here too, and a couple things to throw in here is I know you were just talking about the ACC thing, and I know you and I have had conversations about possibilities. If there was a path for Notre Dame to stay with the ACC as it is now, or maybe even have to fully join in order to prop it up, build up, are there any, and you don't necessarily have to fully state what you think on that, but are there any pathways that lead towards that, or do you think Notre Dame is probably more leaning towards the Big Ten in the future, but they're just holding on to independence as long as they can.
Yeah, I think my money would be on the latter, but I wouldn't rule out the former either. It would be very Notre Dame to get pushed into a corner and say, well, to hell with the rest of you, we're going to just start our own conference, or in this case, just assume the ACC.
Right.
At that point, you'd be looking at, from a Notre Dame perspective, last time I was on the show, I spoke about what it would take for me to join the Big Ten, and that would be USC saying no more. So to answer your question in a way, what would I need to join the ACC? Well, it's USC. That would be one building block to start your own conference. You would have Miami. You'd be looking at other private institutions. So that could include maybe some that no longer play FBS football, but it could also include, your Stanford, who's already there, and other, maybe Northwestern and Vanderbilt in the future if maybe the conferences get a little too big, or if they shift their focus to academics, which is a real threat, or a real possibility, I should say, with the proposed subdivision that the NCAA is proposing. That's going to require a minimum $30,000 trust fund per athlete, which a lot of programs won't be able to afford already. And then you'll have to directly pay the athletes yourself through NIL. So who knows what that future looks like. So I could absolutely see Notre Dame somewhat taking over the ACC, but I don't think it's the most likely scenario at this point. I think I would still, if we're joining a conference, I would hedge my bet on the Big Ten, but I think Notre Dame's going to hold out for a lot longer than people think.
Following that up here real quick, you say the Big Ten. What odds would you say, but first, just the Notre Dame faithful, fans, alumni, whatever, and then maybe even the school, what do you think about the SEC? I mean, we all have our own opinions on it, and a lot has been said on that. But what do you see from actual Notre Dame fans? Is that ever an option, or is that not an option?
I would never underestimate the ability of a certain type of Notre Dame fan to stick it to Michigan. And if joining the SEC is the way to do that, I would say some members of the fan base would look at the SEC really hard. I would use them as a strategic leverage ploy with the Big Ten. I don't know if I'd be serious about joining the SEC, but from just, my perspective, the SEC is a conference that maybe had a reputation for being not so great academically. That's sort of changing. When you look at the institutions that are in that conference, there's a lot of great schools there. It's also the premier athletic, or at least football, conference at the moment. And it wouldn't be hard for Notre Dame to build some rivalries real quick. Notre Dame and Alabama have played for a national championship 4 times, or at least 3. Notre Dame and Tennessee have had a lot of games. Notre Dame and LSU have had a lot of games. There's definitely something there to build. It's not top of my list. I'm not looking at the SEC that's the place, but I think there would be some Notre Dame fans that would argue for that. But when we've done polling on this on our podcast account, it's an overwhelming majority for the Big Ten when we give the 3 or 4 options. That doesn't include independents. Independents will win out when we put them in the poll, but when we ask what conference Notre Dame fans want to see themselves in, if any, it would be the Big Ten.
Okay.
Moen.
Yeah, is there any FOMO, fear of missing out, if the Big Ten moves to 20 teams with a Florida State and a Miami, say? They would have to move to, you would assume they would have to move to 10 conference games at that point. You would also have to assume that USC would have to drop Notre Dame, just because the strength of schedule would be far too strong for USC to compete in the Big Ten and play Notre Dame every single season. So do you think there's any fear of missing out on Notre Dame's part should something like that happen?
Yeah, I think I'll divide FOMO into 2 pieces here. The first piece, just missing out on the Big Ten generally, I'll say no, because I think Notre Dame at any point can join the Big Ten when they want. I don't think there is a fear of missing out on that boat. However, your second point there is the one you specifically went down with USC and a 10-game schedule. Yeah, that would scare me. I wouldn't necessarily assume it means SC stops that game. It's possible. It might even be probable, but I wouldn't assume that right away. But yeah, if we get to that point, I think Notre Dame might have to make some tough choices, and that might include independence or rivalry. But I don't foresee ever a point where the Big Ten wouldn't accept Notre Dame into their conference. There's just too much value there. It'll always be additive. It's extremely marketable. The amount of rivalries you have, the local economic boosts when Notre Dame comes to town. Just for example, the Sun Bowl has just sold out for the second time, the first time being Notre Dame Miami 10 years ago. So there's a lot of value with Notre Dame. So I don't think we'll ever miss out on that, but missing out on USC, I would say is a big fear of mine.
The idea that Notre Dame continues to stay independent, you hear it all the time. There's some pushback on whether now is the time to sort of encourage strongly Notre Dame to join a conference. Are you hearing any additional level outside of what has always been out there in the Twitter chatterverse, for decades, about basically everybody making a move to a conference? Are you hearing any additional fear around that, or has this new NBC contract basically solidified you guys are set for the next 7 years?
Yeah, until 2029, I don't think anyone's going to think about it. We ran an interesting poll on our Twitter account asking people, do you follow the expansion stuff or do you not care? And we gave them several options. Like, you're following it closely, you're aware of what's going on, but you're not too bothered, or you just straight out, don't care. And it's shocking the amount of people who do not care. It's just something that doesn't come across Notre Dame's circle, and it's something you don't hear a lot of rumors on. It's been several weeks since NBC has announced their extension with Notre Dame, and we don't know the dollar figure on that. And don't give me, it's the private school thing. Well, Notre Dame has given us the dollar figure on their NBC deals before. There's just not really a drive within the media or within the fan base to kind of get to the bottom of this. So it is hard to really speak about Notre Dame in the expansion context because nobody has really sources. And I think that's something that it's totally different than some other schools, right? You talk about, Greg Flugar and the money purchase. People talk.
Right.
Does he have contacts at Notre Dame's money purchase? I don't know. Yeah, I don't know if anybody does with respect to expansion, and that makes it difficult. So I'm not really hearing anything on that end. I just know that there's a lot of apathy towards it, and I think a lot of Notre Dame fans are just sick of it and would like for us to just play football, which I understand that, but that's not the reality we're living in anymore. And that might change as well.
I will just note that attitude is the exact same attitude that the Pac-12 had 18 months ago. It was the same attitude the ACC had 2 months ago. And change isn't relevant until it's relevant. So I would just let you keep your people in the know, because who knows what's coming around the corner.
That's a great. It reminds me.
Go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to say that it reminds me of a great lyric from my favorite band, Rush, where it's changes aren't permanent, but change is. And that's something Notre Dame fans aren't really aware of right now, is that change is coming. And I would like to raise awareness as much as I can, but there's only so much you can do.
We understand completely. Immaculate.
Well, I'm going to lean on another question from chat here. Someone wanted to know, who would you say are Notre Dame's top 5 football rivals? We've been talking about a few here now, but just to kind of give people clarity on where Notre Dame, who they lean to more so than others. I know you said USC is number 1, but where would you go from there?
Yeah, that's a great question. I feel like I'm always going to bring this back to polls we ran on the podcast, but we also did a tournament, a mini knockout March Madness style of our rivalries, and we let the fans vote on which ones we care about. So my 5 would probably reflect most of the fan base's 5. So number 1 was USC, far and away. Number 2 was Michigan. That's the oldest FBS rivalry in college football today. It's not active anymore, but it's 1887. 3, by default, you have to say Navy, just because it's that game. It's not a game we love playing, but it's a very important game to our history. To them, there's a lot of meaning to it. They kept Notre Dame afloat during the Second World War, so that's an important one. And from there, I would say Michigan State. That would be my number 4. I love that rivalry. The Spartans are a great fan base in my experience. And then you're looking at, traditionally you would say Purdue, but there'd be shouts for, Pitt or Boston College. I think the one Notre Dame fans love secretly the most is the Miami Hurricanes.
I was going to say, it's
Miami. Is Miami going to sneak in there? All right.
Yeah, it has to.
They are going to sneak in. So I would put them 5th for me. Love that game. It's Catholics versus convicts. It's a longer history than that. They've played almost 30 times. So I love that game. It's such a typical Notre Dame rivalry where you have flashy, arrogant abrasive, all those great things that make a football team versus these, the Notre Dame being totally different in their culture, and it's what makes for a great rivalry, like the USC one. So that's how I would put them. But historically, Miami isn't one of the biggest five, but it's one the fans like among the most.
Charles Zem, who is a SMU grad and a lawyer, he has a question here. He asks, when push comes to shove, is Notre Dame about academics or sports? Would Notre Dame rather be associated sports-wise with the ACC private schools or the Big Ten football schools? And lastly, also, are there any schools that are at the FBS level that you'd like to include in that?
So I'll start with the first question there. That is the $1 million question. I would say, as much as Notre Dame will say it's academics, it's still athletics. Let's be honest. The only reason this university has any kind of prominence is because of the football program throughout the 20th century. Right. I would also say that is a little more evident in the actions of the university. I think for the first time in my lifetime, you're starting to see a bit of a change in the administration. I don't think it's a surprise that Notre Dame has acquired a lot of really good players in the transfer portal. I don't think it's a surprise, or at least a coincidence, that Notre Dame didn't have any major commitment flips like they did in 2023 on signing day. I think the NIL fund situation I think Notre Dame has joined. I think they've committed to that. And you're looking at an administration that went out and hired the most expensive offensive coordinator in college football, Mike Denbrock, and set a record to pay him. That's not the Notre Dame I know. This is a Notre Dame that seems much more committed to football and to academic excellence and athletic excellence. That's the key one as well here for us sports fans. But there's a lot going on, right? There's a new president at the university. There's going to be a new athletic director, and of course, a lot of new head coaches. Marcus Freeman being, the main one at Notre Dame. So I think to answer your question shortly, athletics. I think at the end of when push comes to shove, Notre Dame will not get left out of college football. I can't see that happening. As for your other question, which other FBS program is that in reference for who I would bring somewhere?
No, the second,
or maybe a little more.
Let's do the second question. The third one is sort of off topic. The second question is, would Notre Dame rather be associated with the ACC private schools or with the Big Ten? In your opinion, obviously.
I'd still say the Big Ten. I know the ACC private public mix is really great for Notre Dame, but they were seriously considering joining the Big Ten in the 90s. I don't think public versus private is that much of a barrier. I think at the end of the day, it's more about, money and games and rivalries and history and all that other stuff, which obviously favors the Big Ten. But if you were to say Notre Dame got an invitation to join the Ivy League, well, that would be a different story. That's different than the ACC to me, but that's a topic for another time.
Moen, did you have a question? Just want to make sure everybody's got a chance.
Yeah, sorry, I have to clear my throat. I've still got this cold.
Oh, that's okay.
So you're talking about the transfer portal and Marcus Freeman. You paid this offensive coordinator all this money after last year missing out on the Grubb hire. What do you see positively, offensively, moving forward? I mean, you got Riley Leonard. You've got some wide receivers that have come back that are seasoned now. What do you think Notre Dame's outlook is for next season on the offense?
Well, hopefully better than this season. The Notre Dame offense was very hit and miss this season. To be fair, the offense was great against weaker teams or teams where you should win the game. Sam Hartman looked like a Heisman contender in those games. But then you get to the big games and you're struggling to score again. And that's a problem that Notre Dame has had for at least, I would say, a decade now. Mike Denbrock was the guy who was running the offensive situation last when Notre Dame was probably at its last best offensive seasons, would be that 2014-15 years. So what I expect this year is a bit more consistency because this is an experienced offensive coordinator. This is a veteran coach. Jared Parker is not, and Marcus Freeman is not. So I think you'll see more consistency in terms of game planning and play calling. That's one thing, is sometimes Notre Dame never really used its weapons the way they should have. And that's something Mike Denbrock Brock is great at is really building an offense around his star players. So with Riley Leonard in, that's a mobile quarterback, and a mobile quarterback can always make up, and specifically he's a dual threat quarterback, that can always make up for when things break down. That's one thing Notre Dame has really struggled with, not just Sam Hartman, but Jack Cohn, Ian Book. That goes back a while, is making up plays on the spot. For example, to very horrifically bring up the Notre Dame Ohio State game from this year, Riley Leonard doesn't get stuffed on 4th and 1, right? That they run out the clock that game. So I would expect it to be better. Also, the schedule is easier. So not like it's hard to project for sure, but you don't have Ohio State on the schedule this year. You don't have Caleb Williams as USC on the schedule. You have a different USC, one I'm already less afraid of. So I expect there to be market improvement. I would hope so, but I'm also a fan. At the end of the day, that's what I'm biased, of course, but I like where we're headed for sure. They made the right moves in the portal. They got their guys offensively on the coaching staff, and there's really no excuses for a 10-win season next year.
Wow, I love it. I love the confidence. That sounds so good, Dylan. Immaculate, do you have any follow-up questions?
I mean, we've had a lot of conversations, and I know some folks are touching upon a few things out there in terms of where the ACC could expand. But I think for folks to understand, I don't think Dylan was saying that the ACC private thing with Ivies is not what they're interested in. He's just saying like the current existing ACC private schools. But I think that folks need to also realize that maybe that would completely change if there was some type of a merging of, like, say, Ivy schools and ACC schools. Would you agree with that, Dylan?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, if the Ivies were to come back to major competitive college football and offer Notre Dame some sort of membership into, obviously the very prestigious library and academic connections networks, that would change, I think, significantly for the university. And I don't think it'd be lost on them to be, the first religious school that would get potentially Ivy League status. That I think that's something the university would really care about. So that would be tough. I think that would make the decision a lot tougher than just the current ACC as it's set up. That's how I answered the question, was with the current ACC. I think the preference would still be the Big Ten, even taking aside the money and the rivalries and stuff.
Okay, yeah, because I had saw Charles out there had talked about, if other schools are coming in, because once you start to talk about that, there's a whole lot of options. And I know we'll get into that more in the future when some of these NCAA cases start to unfold and we see if this is actually possible. But there's a lot of potential to it. And just so that folks know that to Notre Dame, I mean, you said that they were athletics first, but I might almost say that they're academics first. I mean, you guys have to recruit nationwide, so you use your athletics to be seen nationwide. You guys have now went and gotten AAU status, and you're talking about how you would appreciate the ACC more if, say, like the Ivy came in and then some others came in. I think Notre Dame, I mean, when you look at your academic statistics, they're through the roof. It's just you're not like a big research school. So I don't. In that case, would you think that? I mean, it's still a academics first thing going on with the school, or
I
is
think
it
that's
truly...
really it's two different things. I think it's two different paths with Notre Dame. They obviously have the academic prominence, but also in the 20th century, without Newt Rockne, without the Four Horsemen, without their success in the national championships, are we even talking about Notre Dame right now?
No,
I don't think we are.
Yeah, and I think that they use that, and that's why they are what they are in academics. I mean, as you can see in movies, like when they first started doing this, anyone could get into Notre Dame. Like, this was like the blue collar school you get to go to, but now it's very elite and tough to get into.
It is very difficult.
So it is an elite academic school. It's just not a big research school.
I would say it's like both. Like, the university in their minds is an academic institution, right? They do not do favors for the athletes when they come to Notre Dame. You have to get in. You have to earn it. You do not live in your separate dorms. You live like a normal student would. You're expected to be a student first. However, like you guys have mentioned, football specifically is what put this university on the map. And at the end of the day, when push comes to shove, I don't think they'll let go of that. If there's a breaking point, I think football would win. I
think your academics would start to falter if you didn't have that nationwide reach through football and academics or athletics.
For sure.
Well, and
Yeah,
I think
I
this
don't know
is.
if you've
Go ahead, Dylan. I'm sorry.
No, sorry to cut you off there. I don't know if you guys have seen, obviously, the movie Rudy, but there was a deleted scene, a director's cut that was released this year. And it was a really nice scene of these people at the diner, and they're asking, Rudy's father, like, what's the big deal about Notre Dame anyway? Why are you guys obsessed with it? And he goes on a beautiful monologue of just what it meant, like, in the early 20th century for these immigrants of all different backgrounds, right? Rudy's family, I think, was Polish. But you get these people who come in at that time were mostly Catholics, right? You have Italians, Polish, Irish. They come into this country, not treated so well for for a while. But when they would get to see Notre Dame, that is the Catholic school, that is the school for the underdog, the school for the immigrant, and they see them compete and win and beat up some of these prestigious schools, that was like a win for us. So that's why it spans nationwide, and why it's beyond, I would say it's beyond the Catholic reach for sure, and I would say it's definitely beyond the Irish reach. I think it's what's so important about the university, and like you said, Immaculate, it's their academics are not what it is if it's not for that football team bringing that nationwide and having something for these families to point to, like, that's where I want you to go. So it's a big part of it.
The biggest thing that I would say is that right now, and until something changes, Notre Dame's going to continue to stay independent. We're answering questions here tonight about Florida State and the ACC and Miami and Clemson. Everybody needs to understand Notre Dame is going to continue to be the exceptional outlier. And unless the rules change at the NCAA legislative level, I don't see, and I don't think anybody you guys would disagree with this, Notre Dame changing from being an independent with a partnership with the league. The question is, would they ever be forced to change that partnership? So, yeah, I think Notre
That
Dame's
might be what it
in
takes.
a really good spot. Yeah.
I think you're spot on. And
go ahead.
I don't want to interrupt the show at all, but I did come in with some almost talking points of my own. If we want to get to that maybe later, or
Please do go for
time.
it. Absolutely, go ahead.
So one of the things I've seen a lot of is, how is NBC going to justify paying Notre Dame 50, 60, 70 million, whatever it ends up being, for 7 home games when you're playing half of them against the ACC? And one of the common things I've seen is people saying, well, NBC is going to force them to play more Big Ten teams, or there are going to be more scheduling agreements, or something's got to give. So I looked into it. I looked at all of our I looked at all of our home games that NBC will be airing from 25 to 29. And if you guys are interested, I'd be happy to go through them with you and talk about maybe why I wouldn't expect more games to be scheduled. I would, if they're going to make more of an integration with the Big Ten, I think it's going to be after 2029. And I'm happy to go through it with you guys now. So
do it.
2025.
Absolutely.
Notre Dame's home schedule is Texas A&M, Purdue, USC, Navy, North Carolina State, Syracuse, and one open spot. That'll probably be a bye game, where it's a one-off game that, you're playing a group of 5 team. In 2026, they're playing Wisconsin, neutral site, but NBC will air the game. Virginia, Michigan State, Syracuse, Miami, Stanford, and again, one open game. In 2027, Purdue, Georgia Tech, Virginia Tech, Navy, USC, and 2 open games. However, one of those will likely be an ACC game, because if you recall, the rumor is that Notre Dame offered 6 games to the ACC for Stanford to come in. They'll play Stanford every year, and there'll be 5 other ACC games. So one of those games will probably belong to the ACC, and then you're looking at just one more open game. 2028, Arkansas, BC, Clemson, Miami, Stanford, 2 open games. And then 2029, it's Alabama, Georgia Tech, Wake Forest, Navy, USC, and 2 open games, one likely being with the ACC. So you're only looking at about 6 spots right now that are open for scheduling in the next, from 2025 to 2029. I don't know where you're going to make a home and home with a Penn State, a Michigan, an LSU, a Tennessee. I think this is the schedule NBC paid for. If they're going to do some kind of scheduling integration, it would either require Notre Dame pulling out of the ACC in some capacity, which I wouldn't rule out, or it's going to be beyond 2029. If this partnership is going to continue, we'll keep an eye on that. But I don't expect any major changes in the next 5 or so years. And I don't know what you guys think of that, but that's 14 ACC games, 7 Big Ten games if you include USC, 4 otherwise, 3 SEC games, and then you got Navy 3 times. So that's what it's looking like, and I think that's just what NBC is paying for. What do you guys think?
Well, I would just like to point out that you named 6 teams in there they're playing that are ACC teams that are considering leaving the conference.
That's a big asterisk. Yep.
That's a huge asterisk. So NBC's paying for this. What happens when Miami's gone? What happens when Virginia or North Carolina's gone? Does that affect the NBC contract at all? Do we know that NBC can pull out and say, hey, if these matchups don't happen, we can pull out or we can renegotiate?
Virginia Tech and North
It
Carolina
might
State were in
exist.
that list too. So
Yeah, it's a great observation. Who knows what's going to happen? I would say Jack Schwarbrick knows what's going on in college football probably better than anyone else. And his remarks right around the time the NBC deal came out was heavily hinted at more realignment is coming, which
Right.
means Jack knew Florida State was leaving, which means I would assume NBC knows because the person they were negotiating with is now our athletic director. So I think NBC is aware of these possibilities. And the question I have is, what is the contingency plan? Could it be, a renegotiating of the contract? It might be, but I would say, why even sign the contract in the first place if both of you guys know FSU is leaving and more is to come? Is it possible that Notre Dame, they have other plans? Is there going to be some kind of pulling from the ACC? Is it going to be more of a formal scheduling agreement with the Big Ten? But if that's the case, when do you do that? Right? Notre Dame's got committed 6 ACC games a year until 29, at least, from what I just read out. So I'm not sure. It's possible NBC might just say, well, that sucks, but that's what we've negotiated. And I know that sounds kind of crazy, but who knows what's really going on.
If the ACC loses its gravitas because it loses its, say, 3 brands that are the top, and we'll just name them, and we won't talk about the Mid-Atlantic, but we'll talk Clemson, Miami, and we all assume Florida State to the Big Ten, that has to devalue the ACC, right? So if we're talking
Completely.
about schools leaving that conference, and we asked this before, and I don't mean to belabor the point, but I'm circling back on it, and that is, at what point is it a diminishing returns? If there's enough schools to leave, and right now in my head, I have 7 that could possibly leave almost overnight if the conditions are right. How could you say you want to rebuild this conference with a bunch of G5 schools? I find that hard to believe.
Well, what Notre Dame might look at is just saying, you know what, this is a G5 conference, and it's no different than our affiliation with the Big East 15 years ago. And
Okay.
that's a safe space, right? You still have a home for your Olympic sports. You still have football teams to play, even if they're not good. And you're still
Right.
getting your payout. So unless ESPN draws back on how much money they're giving, or the ACC network takes a big hit, Notre Dame should still be making, their complimentary payout to go with the NBC deal. I don't think there's an urgency to leave. I think there would be a strength of scheduling issue. But then again, we're in a 12-team playoff era. So that's not like a necessity for Notre Dame to change. Although I could see them wanting to obviously put better teams on the schedule, but I don't think they have to. So I would say even if the ACC, their 3 brands leave, I don't think Notre Dame has to make a move. I think Notre Dame might be looking elsewhere. And I don't know. I think there used to be conversations with the Big 12 over something like this in the past where it was an affiliation deal. I don't know if either the Big 10 or the SEC would be willing to bite the bullet, but maybe Notre Dame just plays a G5 schedule and then in their remaining games tries to schedule as hard as they can. It's hard to say, but I don't think this will force them into a conference yet. I think that'll be like the final domino.
That's wonderful analysis. Go ahead, Immaculate.
Just to kind of throw it in there for us, but also for chat, we've spoken about this before. I think that the NBC Notre Dame deal, what it could possibly do for them if they wanted to join the Big Ten, is it gives NBC some clout for first pick on Notre Dame games in the Big Ten. If you've got an existing deal and say they were to come in a couple years, I think it'd be a hard time. Like Fox would have to make good to know NBC for that value, or the Big Ten would, or Notre Dame could ask for it. But I think that's probably the position on that is why NBC would do this because in my opinion, it was always like, just, if you don't sign with them, Notre Dame's going to have to come to the Big Ten, and they didn't do that. So I got to think that they have some type of heads up on, Fox generally has first pick in the Big Ten, but I think NBC might still have first pick on Notre Dame if that happened. You think that
Yeah,
it's probably in the works,
I
or
think
would you
that's
guys care at that point?
I think that's spot on. I think like if Notre Dame were to be folded into the Big Ten, NBC would retain the rights to the home games. Um, I know I would like to keep that eternity that Notre Dame has its own network for its home games, 7 games a year, nationally televised on our time slot, regardless of conference affiliation. That'd be something I would negotiate for. But yeah, I think NBC's sitting pretty because they're not fully committed to college football, but they could if they really wanted to. You look at the Big 12, you look at what's falling apart in the ACC. I wouldn't rule out NBC doing something crazy either. If, 2030 comes around, the Big Ten's contract is up. Maybe NBC wants to start its own conference.
Right.
And that goes back to something we've talked about earlier about what would it take for Notre Dame to join the ACC, or as I would rephrase it, just start your own conference. Maybe NBC is their partner to do that, or maybe NBC is what bails out the ACC, or maybe NBC is a home for whatever the future looks like in a outside Power 2 world. It's hard to say. It really is hard to forecast, but I think Notre Dame and NBC's relationship is not going to end anytime soon. So wherever Notre Dame goes, I would bet you NBC would be there with them.
Who has the option for the Notre Dame games? Is it Notre Dame holds those rights, or right now it's with the ACC, but could they pay a fee and get out of that?
So the home games are all Notre Dame. So that's why the GOR would be easy to break for Notre Dame because the ACC does not own their football rights.
Okay, that's the question. So they could do their own thing if the ACC really got weakened, they could write a check, get out of it, and move on to a different partner.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. And they would take their 7 home games
Okay.
with them. So the NBC has exclusive rights to all 7 games. 1 usually is on Peacock, 2 get on primetime, and then the rest are on that 3:30 slot, which is the way Notre Dame likes it. As for the ACC games, if it's a Notre Dame home game, NBC is airing it no matter if it's an ACC opponent or not. But when it's an away game and it's an ACC opponent, then that's an ACC game. So their network, ESPN, would air that. So that's how they've been able to schedule it. So it's been good for Notre Dame in the sense that we don't feel trapped or locked into this GOR, which is why it's
Right.
It's a bit hypocritical when we talk about this, or when we look down on your Florida States of the world who are trying to get out of it. It's easy for me to say that on the outside looking in because I don't have that problem. And for the record, I totally understand where FSU is coming from. I'm not judging them. They're a big brand. They deserve to get paid as such. But at the
Right.
same time, I'm not blaming the ACC for vigorously enforcing the grant of rights. So it's a situation where I understand all parties, but I'm happy that I'm not locked into it.
If the ACC didn't have that option, and I'm finding out now they don't, and I didn't think they did, I thought Notre Dame had it. That's just one more mark against the ACC as a conference, because the one calling card, and I'm going to bring this up, we don't have to talk about it at length, but we did this exercise last night where we brought up and we went through all the schools. Where's my spreadsheet at? Went through all the schools and did a little guess on who, where, and when people might leave. And the thing that stood out to me on this is that everybody just took for granted that Notre Dame was going to stay independent, but who their partner is was sort of up in the air. Like, we assumed it was the ACC, but heck, it could be somebody else. So if you're Notre Dame, you really, really have to be feeling strong about where you stand today.
Absolutely. Nobody's in a better position than Notre Dame right now because they get to let things play out in front of them and address the situation as need be. And I am confident Notre Dame has plans A through Z, or Z as I would say in Canada, prepared for every situation. So
Right.
it's a really good position that we're in. I'm glad that we've made the bet on independence and never caved in. Not in the 90s, right? Not in that second wave when Nebraska came into the Big Ten. Not now. It's really helped us. I think in the long run, it's given us a lot of leverage, and it's worked out for us, right? We are the only school with a member on the college football playoff committee, or at least the organizing right? We get a seat at that table, which is, I know that drives Moan crazy, and that's fair, but it's a product of independence, and I'm glad we're in this position. And I feel horrible for the other people who aren't, because there are Oregon states and Washington states in the world who are currently left out, and that sucks. And I've been fortunate enough to interact with a lot of Oregon State fans recently, because we're playing each other in the Sun Bowl, and my heart goes out to them. It's been a rough time for them. They're obviously very passionate, the ones that show out and stuff. So I know I come from a position of privilege as a Notre Dame fan in this conversation, but yeah, it's one that I'm certainly glad we have.
It's one of the reasons why we like talking to you, is because you do have that little bit of humility. Not all Notre Dame guys have that, by the way. Mo, and I have a question for you really quick before we get down we're sort of winding this down anyway, but do you see the Big Ten at all signing an agreement with Notre Dame the same way that the ACC did?
Oh, absolutely not.
Okay.
And I would add, Notre Dame has a seat at the table for now.
Yeah, the negotiation starts again for 2026.
Negotiation starts in 2025, 2026.
Yeah, that's
I
true.
think the Big Ten might say it's a little unjust for one individual school to have representation on a board where everybody else has to deal with just a conference.
Conferences.
Yes.
Yeah, and that's a good point.
Yeah.
Sorry, Matt, I would just say, remember though, Notre Dame and SEC Commissioner Greg Sankey are really tight. That's a weird alliance that has emerged in the last 5 or so years. Is the SEC and Notre Dame sometimes have the same ideas, and if I don't think the SEC wants Notre Dame in the Big Ten, so I wouldn't be surprised if the SEC doesn't. I wouldn't say to stick out their necks for Notre Dame, but I wouldn't be surprised if they don't go along with the Big Ten and say, you need to be in a conference or you don't have representation. I could see the SEC maybe enabling Notre Dame a little bit, but it's a fair point, Moan. It is obviously a special privilege Notre Dame has, and we'll see. And that might actually give us a little indication on what the future holds for Notre Dame.
Yeah, I think you guys there's an old movie called A Fistful of Dollars, and that's how I always think how Notre Dame acts. Is you guys are sitting there right in the middle of all these conference powers on that board, and kind of seems like you guys were able to play this one off of that one, and you're always going to end up being that vote, right? Because there's 10 conferences in Notre Dame. But come 26, I don't know. You might be right. Like, that might be a situation, and we haven't really gotten to those talks yet. There's so much going on. I don't know how deep CFP has gotten into that, but I mean, is that a fear among Notre Dame fans too, that you guys might lose that position with the CFP depending upon what happens?
Immaculate. It's bold of you to assume any Notre Dame fan is even aware of that fact.
All right, we got you, and so that's why we're kind of privileged here to have you here for that. That's
respectfully to my own fan base, they're obviously very intelligent fans. They care a lot. It's just these types of things aren't things Notre Dame fans really worry about. I would say, from my perspective, that is, I think, an indicator of. I think that's the next hurdle for Notre Dame's independence. I kind of see this as almost as a race or a battle where you got to jump a hurdle every now and then to keep that independence going, right? And the most recent one that we just jumped was the NBC deal. The next one is, what does 2026 look like on that playoff committee? From there, it'll be, okay, 2029's up. Where's our next NBC deal? So I think that's absolutely a big thing, and something we got to look out for is Notre Dame going to be able to maintain that position of power on the committee, or is that voice going to be silenced, so to speak? Obviously not silenced, because it would be expressed through whatever conference they're affiliated with, but that could be an indication of what happens with Notre Dame. So something to keep an eye on for sure.
Gotcha.
All right, I think we've gone through this. Boy, it's been a full night. Do you have any other questions for us, Dylan?
Yes. I know at least 2 of you are Big Ten guys, and well, obviously the BYU guy is Big 12, but at least you could all answer it. But what is your, let's say, dream 4 from the ACC if you're the Big Ten expanding eastwards? Who do you, and we'll exclude Notre Dame for this conversation, just when you see what's sitting there, who do you want? Because as a potential future Big Ten member, I have opinions, but I'm curious what the actual people with skin in the game think of what's remaining.
Okay. Moen,
Go ahead, Immaculate.
All
You
right.
go ahead.
For me, as an Iowa guy, I'm going to have a different opinion than the Ohio State guy. To me, we've already got a lot of power coming in, and I already consider FSU as coming in. So for me, I actually want to tone it down a little bit. So for me, it's Florida State, Georgia Tech, North Carolina, and Virginia. It's not what I think we'll get, but that's who I would want if I could just pick 4 and go.
Moen.
Florida State, North Carolina, University of Virginia,
Miami.
and Miami.
There it is. Yeah. See, and that's the difference. I think a lot of people would pick what Moen is saying. I'm definitely probably in the minority.
I think you're both. All three of these are guesses, obviously, but I think the 3 we can all agree on is North Carolina, Virginia, and Florida State. It's that 4th one that really matters. We got 1 Miami. We have 1 Georgia Tech. In my opinion, I think they should take Clemson. So I think there's 3 good guesses there. Answer your own question, Dylan.
Who would you want as a Notre
Great.
Dame guy?
It's it's hard for me to answer that because, like, out of pure Notre Dameness, I would say Pitt for sure because that's a rivalry. Miami, Georgia Tech, but I don't know if Pitt's realistic for the 4. If I were to be a member of the Big Ten right now, I would say yes to Florida State, yes to Miami. I would personally say no to Clemson. I've got nothing against Clemson. Their fans have been great to us. It's just I don't think that's a Big Ten school. And I don't, like you said, Immaculate, I am a little worried if I were a Big Ten member with the amount of power coming in. So I would say North Carolina, as it'd be probably my number 1, but North Carolina, FSU, Miami. And then I think Immaculate's kind of got me on the Georgia Tech train. I see that as a future sleeping giant, so to speak, to be in that Atlanta market with all those recruiting talents there. Great academic institution. It's not a great football program at the moment, so you're not destroying your strength of schedule and cannibalizing yourself that way. So I would lean that way. But man, just keep an eye on Pitt. I feel like I got to carry the Pitt torch here. I think they're a great institution. I think they fit a lot of what the Big Ten does. They're historic. They've claimed 9 championships. I don't know if people are aware of that. And it's a rivalry for Penn State. As much as they want to pretend they don't have one, Pitt, I think, would make a lot of sense for the Big Ten. But you'd probably have to be taking more than 4 to actually get to Pitt. But anyway, long answer, but those are my 4.
I'd have to die on the same hill that I die on for Miami, and that's that they don't have their own stadium and then they play in a rented stadium.
I think Pitt doesn't carry enough numbers. They don't have enough viewership numbers, I think, to justify joining the Big Ten. They're not worth $70 million. For me, that's the number. Any school you bring in has to bring in that amount, or at least trade. And I don't know where you guys get Georgia Tech. I understand where it's coming from. But Bob Thompson, I asked him the risk question, realignment risk. And just because you have a flag in a state or a city doesn't mean that carries the viewership in that city. Georgia Tech is a commuter school. It's a pro sports school or a pro sports town. So I know their research is up there, but realignment is not about research. So anyway,
Big Ten's, I get it. And to me, it's we've got a lot of power coming in. So even if they come in and lose, I don't think it's terrible. Like,
it's the 70 million number. Get me to 70
Right.
million for Pitt or Georgia Tech.
And I only think they take 2. I don't think they take 4.
I think they only take 2 as well. I think 4 is not the
it's
number.
20 for now.
But it's 70 for now. Who gets 70? North Carolina carries 70. Florida State's going to carry 70, pretty close. And I think you could sell, even though you guys don't like them, I think Clemson, right? They were the highest viewed in all the ACC if you look at their TV numbers.
I don't think we have to pay out full, though.
So,
I would say we pay full to FSU, and then we
no,
pay
I'm
half.
talking about what I'm not saying you pay them 70. I'm saying
Yeah.
what does it bring to the conference? What value? It would have to bring in enough to justify adding another school to the conference that's paying out an average of 70. So I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I know
Can I
it's
throw
risky and it might fail, but I would say Big Ten potential in Atlanta and surrounding area. I would still try to take a shot at it.
Can I
Go
throw
ahead.
just
Go ahead,
two
Dylan.
more that I totally forgot were in the ACC? Calford, Cal and Stanford. What about
Mhm.
complementing and finishing that West Coast lockdown and bringing in those institutions which the presidents and chancellors would love?
Who are you
Yeah.
talking about?
Cal and Stanford to the Big Ten.
As far as
Oh, into the Big
part of the
Ten?
four.
Yeah,
I don't think so.
It never happened.
I don't
Never would
think so.
happen. For reasons, it will never happen.
Stanford doesn't share its educational, its research stuff. They have that. I don't know, Moen, you describe it.
They're part of the Ivy League's library system. They will not join the Big Ten Academic Alliance.
There we go.
I think if it was going to happen, it would have. I think the Big Ten would have wanted Stanford with USC.
Yeah,
I
they
think-
begged to get in.
I think they would have wanted Stanford ahead of UCLA, and I just think that that's just not happening for whatever reason. You know,
Yeah.
if part of it's the libraries, you know, if it's just they don't want to be in the Big Ten, they don't want to be beholden to it. They like to do their own thing. I don't know. It just seems like if that was a thing, it would have already happened. And I think you guys are in cahoots with them. Is what I think. Them and
Yeah,
Duke.
it is definitely a fair question coming
It's-
from a Notre
yeah.
Dame guy.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
I think, yeah.
And you know, I think that might be part of it. Like at some point, if Notre Dame's going to come in and say, you know what, we want them to come too. I just
Right.
don't think Stanford wants part of that, and I think that I think y'all are up to something. We'll see.
yeah, you could be right. I
You had
wouldn't be
another
surprised.
question, Dylan?
Notre Dame. Well, I was going to ask Mr. Big 12 who you're looking at in the ACC here and who you could maybe pick over. Like, what is your dream scenario, Miami? I know a few people think Miami might not make it to the Power 2. Is that realistic from your perspective?
I think it's Miami or Clemson. One of them's going to be left holding the bag because the SEC is not going to take either of them, in my opinion. So I think Pitt, Louisville, possibly Georgia Tech. But I think either Clemson or Miami is going to be in the Big 12. And I know they don't like that, but there's just not enough seats on the bus. I think the Big 10 only takes 2 schools, not 4. And the SEC is forced to take 4 schools. I think in their dream scenario, they only take 2 schools too. I think, you know, we were talking about in the summer when we first met, Dylan, we talked about realignment and, you know, possibly going to 24 or 25 schools in these conferences. And now we're finding out there's not as much money out there as we originally assumed there was going to be. These conferences are going to stay smaller. The SEC for certain wants to stay as small as it can. So I think the Big 12 probably is in the best seat of all of them because they can take whoever gets left back in the ACC. And in my opinion, the ACC is a dying conference. Now, that's why I asked you several times about Notre Dame putting their flag in the ground saying, we are the ACC. And if that happened, that would change the world. But I just don't see them doing that. I don't think they want to be that committed.
I agree with you. You know, why tie yourself to a sinking ship at that point?
Right.
When the Big Ten is offering significantly more money and resources and rivalries and regional sports games for the non-football. So yeah, I'm with you there. I'm not sure what happens to the ACC. I think the big thing is we got to see how much it costs to get out, because that could encourage some teams to maybe stay a while, and then who knows what happens after 26 when the playoff expands. Because if conferences are still getting tie-ins and perhaps even buys to the playoff, there's an argument to staying in a weaker conference, right? Which program just recently had mentioned, I think it was Washington, saying, you know, it's not all the money in the world that matters, right? You could do it on a lower budget.
Well, they said that and then ran to the Big Ten.
Of course, right?
They
and
said
the irony,
that, yeah. They said we'll stay in the Pac-12. It's a crappy conference without USC, but we'll stay here because we have an easier path to the playoff. And then they turned around and left. So I don't think that carries as much water. For Notre Dame, I think they're in a unique position. They could do that. I think
You
you
got
guys
the brand.
could.
You got
Yeah,
the brand
you guys
that
could do it.
you guys could have the easiest schedule.
Yes.
And you
still
would
get in.
You would get in for the same reasons Alabama did. You've got like
Exactly
the number
right.
2 viewing. I mean, you would get in.
Yeah.
It's not fair. And people are like, it's not fair. Like, duh. Like, it's not fair.
Right.
And Notre Dame would be a beneficiary of that.
100%.
Okay, one more from me before I go. I know.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just, I don't want to take up too much of your guys' time, but without trying to, you know, suck up to potential FSU joining the Big Ten, if you were the committee and the choice was on you, are you taking Alabama or Florida State as your fourth team?
Florida State.
I'm Florida State, but I'm also very idealistic in terms of what I think the tournament should be, and I think it should be different than what they right now have as their bylaws as to what it is. So, yeah, I'm all about prove it on the field. So Florida State.
My heart says Florida State, but my head says it had to be Alabama. It's an invitational. It's never been a playoff. So,
yeah, I mean, and their
Yeah.
rules, Alabama was the right choice. I don't like their system.
yeah, my heart, I mean, a BYU guy, right? I hate the questions to national championships. I hate the guys that say, well, you didn't do this and you didn't do that. You play who's in front of you and you win, and that's where you determine the champion. But that's not the system we have now. The system we have now is not only corrupt, but it's completely one-sided. If we look back months ago, Florida State, ESPN was downplaying them in October. They were talking about strength of schedule. They were knocking down their own product. They own the ACC network, right? They knew Florida State could possibly win out, and yet they started back in October minimizing the quality of their wins. So that was it. This was the thing that broke the system.
It's kind of funny you asked that. I actually think the fan base that should be most upset about Alabama getting in is not Florida State, and they should be upset, but actually Texas. And I saw a comment in chat, and that's what brought this up. Texas already beat them. To have, Alabama, you look at Alabama, you look at Florida State, and Alabama gets picked, but yet a team that's also going in has already beaten them this year. So, everyone wants to say we don't want to minimize the regular season. Well, that's exactly what they just did. So I think that there's two reasons for Alabama not to be there, and Texas may be the number one reason.
To piggy off of that, if Jordan Travis doesn't get hurt, I believe FSU is in. I think the question becomes, is it Texas or Alabama? Because I think you would have that same interesting debate of who is the best team by week 14 or whatever to get into that playoff. And I think I was granted they were Oklahoma Sooners fans, but I was having some conversations with them, and they had argued Alabama should get in over Texas, and made at least a plausible argument for me. And I think you're right to say Texas should be the one that's upset, because if it wasn't Jordan Travis getting hurt, it might have been Texas left out. I don't know if that's possible, but Alabama is a big draw, and how much of that is a factor at the end of the day?
Who do you think should have been in?
Same answer as you guys. I think in principle, absolutely Florida State, but at the end of the day, this is an invitational, and Alabama would probably beat Florida State, I think. So I don't fault the committee too hard. It's a no-win situation. Like Hart says Florida State, mine says Alabama, like you had said. I think we're pretty much all in agreement there too. It's unfortunate that it's happened, but hopefully it's not an issue next year.
I almost wonder if it was meant to be, because if Travis doesn't get hurt, I agree with you. I think Florida State gets in. All right, guys, this is 2 hours. We did back-to-back great interviews. Thanks so much for being here, Dylan. We appreciate it. We're going to do this again probably in a few weeks, if you're okay with that.
Thanks for having me, guys. Really appreciate it. We'll always be here to talk more Notre Dame realignment stuff. It's my creative outlet, since Notre Dame fans aren't happy hearing it anymore. So
Okay.
take it to you guys. All
right.
Thank you so much for having me.
You bet. Happy holidays.
Yeah, see you too. See ya.
Take care,
Okay,
Dylan.
we'll see you
Good
later.
talking to you.
Oh my gosh, guys, back to back. That was
That was a big one.
awesome. Thank you so much, Dylan. Four Horsemen Podcast. Thank you very much for being here. Everybody, please follow him on Twitter and watch their show on where podcasts are. I believe they also have a YouTube page. But regardless, look them up and you'll be able to find their podcast online. I think we'll just wrap this up. Moen, I know you can't say a lot. Is there anything you want to add tonight?
Yeah, make sure you hit that like and subscribe button. Turn on your notifications. The new membership program, we're going to be rolling out benefits at the beginning of the new year. Exclusive videos, early access. So check it out.
Appreciate it. Immaculate.
Yeah, just put it in chat and say once again, if it's a small thing, and if you guys wouldn't mind giving us a thumbs up on the way out, it does help out. Lets us kind of know how people are feeling about certain episodes. It also, of course, helps with the algorithm. But stick with us, man. Realignment is kicking up now. Now we're just about out of football. Once all these games are over, it's going to be pretty hot and heavy, and we're going to have a lot to talk about. And certainly appreciate you guys coming in the chat and adding your 2 cents too, because we learn from you as well. So great show, guys, and let's just keep it rolling.
We have no show tomorrow unless news breaks that we need to cover. And we're probably not going to do one on Friday. And the reason is because Ohio State plays and Moen won't be here. If Immaculate has time, maybe we'll throw a call-in show together on Friday. But right now, we don't have anything planned the rest of the week. Look for us at the top of the week next week. And are you guys going to do a Saturday show? It's good. It's New Year's Eve.
We could maybe throw a Spaces together too.
Okay. Well,
Do a little
who knows?
something.
Everybody follow us on Twitter and make sure you subscribe on YouTube, and you'll know when we're coming on next. We appreciate everybody being here. Have a great holiday season if we don't see you, and everybody stay out of trouble. I appreciate you being here, and thanks, Bone, and thanks, Immaculate. Appreciate your time.
Appreciate it.
See you later. Peace out.